All right, so this will be the season 1, episode 16 Q&A session with Grant Schultz.
So Luke asks, do you have any particular recommendations for a maritime climate? Cool, dry summers, long, wet, autumn, winter, spring, overcast periods, same drought issues, Mediterranean climate, except less evaporation issues, more winter precip to store, and occasional winter freezes. Well, I don't personally have any experience in a maritime climate. So all I can say is look for a climate analog. So look on a world map wherever other maritime climates are. So like a climate analog for Iowa, I'm in a temperate climate. The Ukraine is basically an identical climate analog to Iowa. So whenever I'm facing a management concern that I don't know anything about, I'll look to say, okay, what works elsewhere in the world in my similar climate that people have been doing for centuries that makes a lot more sense than whatever, no-till agriculture is with glyphosate and a combine. So that's one recommendation I would say is look for your climate analog. But again, just manage soil moisture to the best of your ability based upon your constraints. That's all I can say to that one. Savannah Lang asks, can I put up a list of the links? I probably could, or Josiah could share it with the list of attendees. Can you do that, Josiah?
Yeah. Can you not hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
You froze up for a little bit.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, I'll put in the link to the show notes, where the show notes will be, and you guys can we'll get all the links put in there.
So Stephen asks, suggestions for enterprises in this realm that could be done on smaller acreages. Hope everyone can hear me. Josiah, nod your head if you can hear me. Cool. Well, I would focus on value-added products and high value per acre products. So if you're on a limited land base and you're concerned with economic outcomes, you're not going to want to be grazing cattle on less than 10 acres in all likelihood. So I would look at, hey, what can make the most per acre that I really enjoy that suits my soil type and my climate. So I used to be an heirloom hardneck garlic grower. I would produce over 2,000 pounds a year, and they were selling from $8 to $24 a pound. So do the math on that. It adds up in a hurry. And that's on a pretty small land base. Elderberries, I'm really a big proponent of if you're in a wet area on a smaller land base, because they yield like mad. I think it yields quick in year 1 or year 2. And once you get those fruit, you can sell them wholesale for $2 a pound, or you can process them in a value-added product. It's very marketable. It's got a long storage life on it, but it also, there's no national player in elderberry cough syrup, right? So I think that there can be a lot of nodal or fractal implementations of that across the country. It's a right livelihood.
So Grant, I'm also posting these questions to you so you can read them. Mick asks, how do we manage the vines? Lots of people recommend vines, but for me, they seem to take over rather than support the system.
That's a great question. How do you manage vines in a silvopasture multi-layered system? Again, that's one element that I have excluded on early established stuff. I have not necessarily mono variety, but some monocultural blocks of vine crops, both grapes and kiwis, hardy kiwi, Actinidia arguta hardy kiwis. Vine crops tend to have higher growth rates than trees, and ultimately they'll choke them out. And then harvesting, if you let it grow naturally up into the overstory of a tree, not only are yields going to be reduced because of leaf cover, but you're not going to be climbing up into a 60-foot tall hybrid chestnut tree to get grapes down. That's kind of stupid. So I've really eliminated that layer on a large extent in a polyculture because it is so management intensive. I do have plenty of honeyberries and elderberries as understory shrubs in a tree system, but I'm really waiting on that secondary layer a lot because they do have a tendency to have high growth rates and choke out what I would consider primary species that I'm trying to focus on management for the time being. Is there a viable way to insert human residents within a large-scale system in this manner with livestock, i.e. off-grid hemp houses in the pastures? Well, off-grid any houses in the pastures. Yeah, if you look at pastoral lifestyles, especially in old Europe, the idea of living amongst livestock and herding them along is commonly done. I've spent plenty of night sleeping in a tent in a pasture, just being near livestock. I lived in a FEMA trailer for 3 years that was on, dual axle, 24-foot long FEMA trailer. If you really wanted to be that close to your livestock, you could certainly just go along with them in an RV, off grid, a few hundred watts of solar, and you should be good to go. Aspiring to an off-grid hemp house is, I don't know what that would look like, but that's certainly an aspiration. But a tent or an RV or an old woolen sleeping roll works too. What kind of persimmon is that in your slide? Does it produce all winter? I believe that one was Rasa Yanka, which is a hybrid Asian American, but don't quote me on that. I think that was just a stock image I pulled from somewhere. American persimmons do a good job of hanging into the winter. They don't produce all winter. What they do is they fruit in the fall. They start really getting ripe, late fall. And some of them, that abscission layer, that where that stem is attached to the branch, it doesn't necessarily want to fall off right away. So it's variety specific too. Some varieties will hang better than others, and freeze-thaw cycles also play a role in that. But again, that's why it's so important to observe trees in your area, what varieties actually grow there, and how they act into the winter and year-round. Brian asks, can you grow your own bare root trees, shrubs, etc., and then use those as part of the EQIP program and get reimbursement grant funds? Yes, I've done it. It does require approval of your NRCS rep. You do need to provide documentation that what you are paying yourself is comparable to what you would buy stuff from a nursery for. And it would never hurt to create a separate LLC as a separate entity to buy from. So you've got Brian's nursery, and then you've got Brian's farm, and Brian's nursery is furnishing an invoice to Brian's farm. Again, you don't want to ever be committing graft, and you have to always, graft meaning essentially theft from the government. So you need to document everything, but especially if you want specific varieties that you can't get from nurseries, it's perfectly okay to propagate your own stuff. Carlton says he has a house already done. I don't know if that was referring to the hemp house. That was pretty cool if you do. Rob asks, how do you know what you can graft and what you can't legally? So it's called PVP, or plant variety protections. So variety patents in the US, to the best of my knowledge, last 20 or 21 years, I think, something like that. So like a Honeycrisp apple is now out of patent, and anyone can graft a Honeycrisp without paying a PVP fee, meaning paying a royalty fee. I think USDA keeps a database of what is in variety patents and what is out. But the easiest way to do that, if you're unsure, is Google a specific variety with plant variety patent, and then when you find the actual variety patent, it'll have a date of expiration on it. That's a pretty high level question. I know that in some cases, variety patents only hold true for commercial production. So if you want to grow like a Zestar apple that might be under patent for home consumption and not commercial, I think it might be exempt, but I'm not certain of that. Are there zoning restrictions involved with receiving money from the NRCS? Great question. So there used to be under EQIP, but it had to be a farm already with like a base. So it already had to be in the USDA database. But that is not true anymore with the onset of urban farming. So you can go ahead and you can enroll a residential property if you're using it for commercial agricultural production into FSA/NRCS. Now, that doesn't necessarily assure that you're producing an agricultural crop legally in your local zoning. Meaning you could have a residential zoned, place with some stupid condo association that won't allow you to sell crops. But you can still have a residentially zoned property enrolled in NRCS programs. You might have to go to the FSA office, the Farm Service Agency, and enroll that farm, get a farm number first, if it doesn't already exist. But once you do that, then you are indeed eligible for at least some EQIP programs. So you can get like a high tunnel cost share for an urban farm. Totally, it's been done. Michael asks, does it make sense to cut low value forests to replace the high value trees on 50 acres with 30 acres-ish wooded? In some cases, for sure. I would argue in many cases, it probably does. There's certainly economic inputs knocking that stuff down, but if it has no economic benefit for you as it is, you know, you'd be a fool not to. Rob asks, I live in an area that has very expensive land, so I have been looking at leasing land to cash flow into permanent farm that I would own. Most of the land is either being farmed or has been sprayed heavily. We are in a big dairy area with conventional methods. I've looked at grants, etc., but most, if not all, require upfront cash for reimbursement, which I do not have. I'm 40 with a family and not getting any younger, so it's tough to just pick up a family, move to another part of the country where land is more affordable and where I would have a fun job. That's a great question. Just to share, I have a long-term lease with an option to purchase with a landlord, and it started as a really positive relationship, and it quickly devolved to being like a really negative one, kind of a serf vassal sort of thing, you know. So I'd be really apprehensive about leasing land unless you had a really pre-existing long-term relationship with that landlord, and knowing that any bit of infrastructure you put into that, any bit of investment you put in that property, you may or may not have equitable share in. So if you're thinking long-term and you really care about, you know, resiliency and a long-term livelihood, I know it's tough, but you got to have community. You got to have a good ecosystem. If you're fighting the good fight and building a really great agroforestry site, and your neighbors are conventional and it goes in your well and your kids are getting, you know, drinking water with endocrine disruptors in it, you know, you got to think big picture and you got to think about community and care. So that's a tough question. I struggle with the same thing. But I would really look at, you know, number one, you've got to establish equity. You got to be building long-term systems that you have control over, and go from there. But a lot of people struggle with that, and there's no easy answer. I think the easy answer is move to Southwest Wisconsin. So next question, for the drone GPS topographic photogrammetry, is there a rough cost per acre? Can this kind of service be partially covered by EQIP grants? Sometimes. Yeah, sometimes it's rough cost per acre to do a survey, to do a GPS survey, meaning aerial photography, aerial video, and creating a topographic map, is roughly about $2,500 a day. Now it can be a little less than that, it can be a little more than that, but you can do up to 600 acres a day for that same price. So the cost comes down precipitously. If you can co-locate a job, so if a contractor is coming to your site and you can get some neighbors that also want to get that work done, again, you can do 600 acres a day, regardless of cost. So, you know, you can divide it by 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 people. That's an advantage too. And then the design side, again, it's variable. You really got to bid it on a per job basis. You really do. Yeah, so I can't give you fast answers on that, but $10 to $75 an acre. That's the general range. Rob asked, what breed of pigs do I run? Kuni Ossabaw crosses. So the Kuni is a breed from New Zealand. They're like spotted pot-bellied pigs. And the Ossabaw Island hog was marooned off the coast of Georgia on Ossabaw Island by De Soto in 1539. So they went feral, survived for 500 years without human intervention, and then they got crossbred to the Kuni. So that's what I run. Smaller bodies, you know, medium length snouts. They're not as prone to rooting. They do well. They put on fat really well, so they do well on a forage diet, so they can survive over the winter. In some cases, kind of drawing from their fat reserves a little bit, but no supplementary feed beyond just hay, no grain. Missouri Agroforestry Center recommends chestnuts at about 50 per acre. Seems like my density is much higher. Absolutely. So 50 trees per acre at maturity, you know, at age 20. So I'm planting thousands of trees. That works out to about 300 trees per acre typically. And then I'm thinning accordingly. So the ones that come into bearing early, those are winners. The deer come and munch on some. You get some livestock to break out and they knock over a tree. You're going to have death loss for sure. So I'm planting at higher densities and then managing accordingly, thinning, accordingly to get to that 50 per acre. Yep. Because I assure you, if you plant 50 trees and you get a drought year and you get some bucks in the rut that come in there and mess it up and have 10 trees left over, you're going to wish you would have planted 300 trees because it doesn't cost you that much more. What are good alternatives to fencing on a small scale to keep wildlife out? 10 dogs, 15 dogs. There's fences work for a reason. Of all the things that I've done on my site that I wish I would have done on day one, fencing would have been it. I assure you that it depends on where you are in the world, I guess, but you're always better off paying good money for a good fence right away. Even if you have to build it yourself, you can build high tensile fence pretty cheap, $1 or $2 a foot. Luke says, head for the hills, they're cheaper and cleaner. Yeah, for sure. So hilly landscapes have typically less chemical input, less intensive agriculture. Land is cheaper. It is cleaner. It's also typically further from population centers. So there's pros and cons to that, but for sure. Have I run into any issues with neighboring conventional farmers while mob grazing, finishing your pigs from their point that they'll possibly escape and go feral? Not to my knowledge. I think I heard a story about someone in Michigan that being an issue. Hey, livestock, they get out every now and then. You're going to have breakouts. You can have the best fence in the world. You can have the best fencing energizer in the world, and a big storm can knock a tree over and knock the fence out, and then you get livestock out. Shit happens. That happens in farming country. That's what tagging is for. And good management, and you bring them back. I don't think that's a valid concern. No. I can see that there could be fear from conventional farmers for sure, but you got to manage that accordingly. Rob asks, am I grafting over seedlings with specific varieties in the same row for chestnuts, or are you primarily wanting to use for forage? Both. So this is really important. So selected variety of chestnuts, there's tremendous yield variance in selected varieties versus seedlings. Tremendous. So like a Chinese chestnut at maturity will do 4,000 pounds an acre. That's a lot of nuts. A lower quality seedling might do 1,000 pounds an acre. So that's like year, 15, 20, whatever. But 3,000 pounds more chestnuts per acre by grafting over to a good variety at $2 to $5 a pound, let's say $2 on the low end, that's $6,000 gross income differential annually by taking the effort to graft that over to a good variety, right? So definitely grafting, very much worth it. Eliza asked, you need to be a nonprofit to receive grants? Absolutely not. Nope. That's one of the crazy things about it. I know multi-millionaire, multi-generational legacy farmers who have absolutely no need for grant money or no challenge whatsoever in getting borrowed capital ever, who are walking away with $300,000 grants every year. It's ridiculous. So I don't want to necessarily fault them for that because they're the ones actually writing the grants and getting it, but you don't need to be a nonprofit. No, you can be a for-profit. What happened to my free money for farmers listserv? It's largely orphaned. I put out an email nowhere near as often as I would like. I hope this presentation shared some more stuff about that. SARE.org, I would send out emails to folks about the SARE.org about when grant programs are released they're open, like, hey, the application date is now and the closing date is now. Here's what you need to apply for it. Another thing is that having the word free in the email, oftentimes it would get bounced for spam, which I learned the hard way. So never have a URL with free in it because spam programs will automatically kick it out. So a lot of people that were on that listserv weren't getting emails because it had the word free in it, which is my failure. So sorry about that. Anything else? I've got more questions on the main one, Josiah. Should I go for those now?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. I'm going to scroll up here. Derek asks, are my rows on contour or a modified keyline? I would guess it would set up to allow access for equipment. Would I change anything? It's a modified keyline, meaning it's not big K, circle R keyline. 30-foot alleyways for my purposes there, and it was set up to run equipment. They're between 1% and 4% off of contour, pitched towards the ridges. So that was the general, design construct. Would I change anything? On the main planting, probably not. 30-foot alleyways is pretty good. If I was running more larger ruminants, I definitely want a wider alley spacing. But I'm not. The primary focus for me was on fruit and nut crops for human consumption and like a U-pick arrangement. So it works for me. If I wanted to recreate an oak silvopasture and I was just running a cattle herd, I'd probably want to have 60, 90, 120-foot alleyways, just because paddock sizes need to be appropriate for running larger groups of animals. Curtis asked, do I ever plan to run cattle? Yes, we did have them there for a short period this last year. At some point, I'm basically tapped out with the number of enterprises that I can run. I had an intern who stayed on another year who was running cattle. Ultimately didn't work out, just kind of general personality conflict. Didn't want to pay for forage anymore, and he chose to leave, and that was fine. But yeah, I'd love to run cattle. I need to get a herds person on site to do so. Do I have a resource you'd recommend for massive bulk trees? Yeah, I mean, New Farm Supply is my nursery. Last year I would have recommended myself. This year I'm taking a year off. Lawyer Nursery is a place to get massive bulk trees of mediocre quality. A lot of the state nurseries you can get massive bulk trees of mediocre quality. If you want to get bigger trees at volume, you've got to have them custom propagated. So you can hire a nursery to grow them out for you. You can buy nuts, or you can pick seeds up or pick nuts up yourself and get them propagated. But genetics, again, are really important. So if you're going at any of those bulk sources, you need to either understand that you're going to graft everything yourself, or you need to have them custom propagated. And a lot of the bigger nurseries, especially out west, California, Oregon, Washington, will happily do custom propagation for trees, but you got to pay them like a deposit, a year or two ahead of time, and then you get them 2 years later. Yeah, so one the same. Brian says, I mentioned endocrine disruptors. Is there any groundwater taintings around my farm in Iowa that are of concern? Yeah, I mean, people get tested all the time. Nitrates, sometimes you get high nitrate loads in water, in groundwater. Nitrates aren't necessarily endocrine disruptors, but they do have health effects. I think oftentimes in more urban areas, when you have a little bit higher pharmaceutical output, really back in the sewage system, back into waterways, you're seeing higher levels of endocrine disruptors. I mentioned PVC, so PVC, the phthalates in polyvinyl chloride pipe, typically flexible PVC, like kids' toys or like vinyl gloves, that kind of thing. The phthalates can act as endocrine disruptors. So I built my well system with no PVC in it whatsoever. There's no submerged PVC. It's all steel pipe, iron pipe, and HDPE. So, potable water rated high density polyethylene. So no PVC in my well system anywhere. Do I still sell the large chestnuts? I think they were colossal. No, I've never sold colossal. I've sold hybrid chestnuts of Sleeping Giant and Dunstan parentage, and then Ching, and some of the other hybrid Chinese and three-way cross chestnuts. Never colossal. And as of now, I'm not selling them at all this year, no. Luke asks, can I define modified keyline versus formal keyline? I practice no ego keyline. So there's a lot of different big name practitioners in this whole world of regenerative agriculture, and some of them are bigger proponents for dogma or codification, and I don't follow any of that. If a rule needs to be broken in an appropriate case, I'm willing to break it. So that's what I'm saying. I'm planting rows of trees on contour with consideration for water runoff and soil moisture. If I need to put in a stopgap row in there or a filler row that removes perfect parallelism up and down an entire slope, I will do so, because what matters for me is the number of trees per acre, the number of sticks in the ground, because I'm worried about fruit yield, not worried about as much, perfect, endless mechanization, because if I have to turn back around in a row and come back around, that's fine if I get another 10 trees in the ground. And we also have highly erodible soils. So my soils they're silt, clay, loam, they're highly erodible. If you do this perfect capital K in 24% grade slopes, at times you're getting rows that are almost perpendicular to the slope, high uphill. So if you're practicing subsoiling and you're going around along these rows, laterally parallel to them, high up on a slope of capital K perfect keyline, you're cutting a trench directly down the slope, which is asking for erosion. And I think that where a lot of those capital K keyline was developed was in a little bit lesser sloped, way lower rainfall areas, and it is what it is. A lot of opinions, a lot of egos in the space. I'm doing what I'm doing because it works for me. I'm a proponent for breaking rules whenever and wherever possible, but I'm not going to dig into it too much because frankly I don't care. You follow your own motivations.
Let's see, Stephen had a great question. He was asking if you had any suggestions for enterprises in the realm that could be done in smaller acreages, like less than 10 acres.
Yeah, I think I covered that one already. Again, focusing on high dollar, gross per acre, which means probably higher labor inputs. Garlic, annual veg, smaller fruits like ribes, currants, gooseberries, elderberries. You can still have perennial systems or sustainable systems at a smaller scale, and frankly, they have a lot higher dollar volume, per acre, but it's gonna take more management. The big thing too with tree crops is like, hey, I can put a black currant in the ground and it's yielding the next year, and it cost me, a cutting or $2 or $3 or $4. If I put an apple tree in the ground, it's gonna cost me 15 or 30 or $50, and I've got to wait 5 years. So I think cash flow is way better in some of the smaller fruits and veg than it is in tree crops. Yep. Yeah, Rain Tree and Burnt Ridge, they do great work. They have great stock. It's just really damn expensive. And at my scale, I need to put 20,000 trees on the ground at a couple bucks a piece, not 10 trees at $30 a piece. So I respect those folks a lot, and they do great work. But it really depends on your context. And I have no problem saying that to the world. And yeah, the fruit trade nurseries, Oregon and Washington is the epicenter of the fruit nurseries. So if you live in that area, that's great for you. Cool. What else have we got here?
We have a couple more minutes, guys, with Grant. If you have any additional questions, go ahead and ask them now. If not, we'll go ahead and wrap things up.
Back to equipment, and it's worth mentioning this, is that the idea of an open source tree planter, it's so simple to build one, and I think it's really important that those plans get out there. Both Darren Doherty and his network, I think he's working on like an open source keyline plow or subsoiling plow right now, and that'll be cool when that gets finalized and comes out. And then Marcin Jakubowski with open source ecology, I don't know if he's working on a tree planter yet, but I really hope he does, because I think it is so important to get that kind of equipment out there, because it's so easy to build, but you got to get the angles right and you got to get the dimensions right. And I think that you got to put a little bit of research into that to do it right. So I hope that gets done. Somebody else gets done that. David asks, will you revive the How to Build a Pond project? Maybe into the future. We'll see. It won't be this fall. It might be next year. That's all I can say about that. The Kickstarter didn't make it, and it takes a lot of time and money and energy to document those kinds of things. I've got a lot of ponds I can build in the future. Again, I've got a little bit of land uncertainty with my landlord right now. I'm actually in a legal battle trying to buy the farm, and they're saying, no, we're not going to follow through with what we already said we would do 4 years ago. So I've got a lot up in the air for me right now. And I'm not going to promise anything I can't deliver on. So we'll see. I don't know.
We got a question from Brian. He asks, is there a no-till drill seeder in the open source project?
I do not know. That's a question for either Darren or Marcin. I think there is one on FarmHack, I think, actually. Check it out.
All right. Diana asks, could you please elaborate on the comments that you made on the PVC alternatives? Could you give some more information, or
where is this question so I can read it?
In the Q&A, if you hit the Q&A button.
Could you please repeat your comments on the use of PVC alternatives? I heard PVC alternatives. I was like, yeah, who needs a PVC? Just go plant stuff. Yeah, okay. So PVC is polyvinyl chloride, and in general, when PVC is manufactured, it releases dioxins, which in and of itself are an environmental toxin, right? So that's bad, right? When PVC is made more flexible by using a compound called phthalates, and phthalates are an endocrine disruptor, and they stay in the plastic, right? So like a vinyl glove is still polyvinyl chloride, but it's been treated with phthalates to make it flexible. PVC pipe is more rigid, right? So in the case of like wire, so there's in a well pump, a deep well pump, you've got a wire that goes down to the pump, which is submerged in your aquifer, in your water, right? So if you think about Romex or any common wire, it's coated with PVC plastic that is also treated with phthalates to make it flexible, because you got to pull wire through a wall, or drop it down through conduit or into a well pit, right? So you don't want to have PVC wire hanging out in your drinking water, right? And though it's a small amount, it's still there, and we know that even small amounts of compounds can cause major physical detriment. So TPE is an acronym for a thermoplastic that's also flexible and waterproof, that they use in a high-end wire for submersible use for like well pumps. So ICE is one of the brands of TPE wire that you could use in a well pump. Back to other materials like the well casing, that which you're lining it with. Traditionally, it was always steel, iron pipe. It costs a little bit more money per foot, but it's you can hit a baseball bat against it, it's not going to break. You can run a car into it, and the car bends instead of the well casing breaking. So use steel instead of PVC for the casing. And then for the drop pipe itself, I use galvanized pipe. So I use 2-inch galvanized pipe in 21-foot lengths instead of using PVC pipe as a drop, because again, that stuff's just nasty and you don't want it in drinking water. And then when you're running it underground, I use HDPE pipe, high density polyethylene pipe. And I've actually opted to use a geothermal pipe for that use of HDPE, because you can get many different grades or kinds of HDPE pipe. And geothermal pipe is still rated for potable water, meaning you can still drink from it, but its cost per foot is less than conventional HDPE water pipe. So I use socket fusion fittings, so it's heat fused on geothermal pipe, and its cost per foot is lesser. I think maybe because there's more of it made, I don't know, but I know it's OD controlled when they make it. So the outside diameter of the pipe is what they're controlling in the die versus the inside diameter. So maybe it's cheaper to manufacture. I don't know, but the plastic itself is the same material. I can get 2-inch diameter pipe for about 94 cents a foot, which is super cheap for pipe that's that large. Yep. Is there a no-till drill in the open source project? I can't confirm it, but I would look at both open source ecology and farmhack.org.
Okay. You just broke up there a little bit at the end, but I think we're gonna wrap it up for now today, guys. Thank you very much for being with us today, Grant. It was exciting, lots of information, lots of great questions to all of you. We will have the links that Grant mentioned, the resources, in the show notes of today's show. So look for that. And once again, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Grant.
Cool. Thanks, everybody.